Now it's my pleasure to introduce the 2018 GMA Candidates Forum. I hope that you as city officials have begun to pay attention to the candidacies of these individuals who are seeking to become the next governor of the great state of Georgia. It is utmost importance to city officials to research each candidate and where they stand on issues that matter to our city governments. For those of you that were able to attend the Lieutenant Governor Candidate Forum yesterday, you know that GMA has launched a 2018 connection website to track the positions of each candidate for Lieutenant Governor and Governor. I encourage you to look up that website found through GMA's homepage and pay attention to the campaigns. Further, I hope you will listen to the candidates and be active in this coming primary election in May and in the general election in November. As we conduct this morning's forum, I know our members will be respectful and courteous, show GMA civility towards all the candidates, and allow them to speak uninterrupted. The candidates' order today is alphabetical. However, we are alternating between Democrat and Republican candidates. We are beginning with the Republican candidate, Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle. Now I will turn the program over to GMA staff member Aileen Harris, who will introduce each candidate.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll just ask our panelists to join me on stage. So the format is each candidate will have 8 minutes to give an opening statement. Then our panelist, Greg Bluestein from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, will ask each candidate 2 questions. The candidate has 2 minutes to respond to each question. Following the question and answer period, the candidate will have 2 minutes to make a closing statement. So let's begin. We'll start with our first candidate, Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle. Good morning. Thank you for joining us at Mayor's Day.
Glad to be here. Thank you very, very much. And let me just say on the front end, Larry, congratulations to you and obviously each of your staff. We have enjoyed a wonderful partnership together over the years, and it is great to be here with you this morning. I know my time is very, very short. I see a clock in front of me, which is actually makes it real nice. It's counting it all down for me. But Georgia is expected to grow by 4.5 million people in less than 15 years. I want you to stop and think for just a moment. 4.5 million people is the size of South Carolina coming on top of Georgia. Now, if they're all Clemson Tiger fans, we're going to turn them back, okay? But the beauty about being governor is you have the opportunity to shape and plan for what that growth is going to look like. I think all of us witnessed when the I-85 bridge collapsed what took place. It demonstrated to us 2 things. One is our infrastructure is built for about half the size of the population that we are today. Secondly, it demonstrated when government gets out of the way and you incentivize the private sector to do what it does best, you can build a bridge back in 45 days. And that's exactly what we did, absolutely. And so certainly we have to be committed to building the infrastructure of tomorrow. We have to be committed to making sure that we're looking at a 10-year strategic plan and being willing to do things very creatively. And that means that we have to look at a tunnel going under or going over with elevated road systems, along with utilizing our existing infrastructure in a more efficient way, allowing for reversible lanes to exist to get people into the city where they need, but also out. And along with that, we have to be committed as well to building out broadband. Today in our state, you can do business anywhere in the world from any corner of this state if you have connectivity to that superhighway. And I will tell you, building out that broadband system is a high priority for me as your next governor as well. But I also want to touch on an important piece. When we look at Georgia and we see so much economic prosperity, there are communities that are losing population. And in shaping where that growth needs to be, we need a governor and someone who something that I will be committed to is ensuring that we are bringing more economic opportunities to our rural communities, to give them the opportunity where they can have the types of jobs that they need that are going to lift them up. And with that, we have to be committed to really my second point, and that is building a world-class workforce that is second to none. For all of you that have followed my career, you know that this is an area that I have been very passionate about. When I became Lieutenant Governor in 2007, I created the College and Career Academy Network across the state, where kids now have the ability at high school to explore the different career pathways available to them, get either the industry certification or be able to get the 2-year degree while still in high school. What we have demonstrated through this process is that not only have we increased graduation rates, but we have doubled incomes for high school students coming out of school. You see, this is a value proposition. And what we've also discovered is we now have kids fighting to get into school versus fighting to get out. That's the environment that we want. We want an educational system that is aligned with industry needs. Because in your communities all across the state, if you have a pipeline of workers that are coming out of those high schools that are meeting the needs of existing industries, then those industries will grow and be prosperous. Along with that, it will be a beacon for so many other businesses to say, this is the community that I want to be in. And in these college and career academies, they truly are economic engines for the community. And I can cite so many examples where companies have located and they have specifically said, we are here because of this college and career academy. As governor, I have a 2020 plan that will have every student access to a college and career academy across the state. But we can't just stop there. We have to continue to focus on the other initiative, the German apprenticeship program. That's a 3-year high school program for students to gain the skills that they need, where industry will have the workforce by which they need. But we also have to be committed to ensuring in our rural communities that we have innovation hubs and partnerships with our post-secondary institutions. You see, I don't believe that you have to be in Atlanta to do business in Atlanta. And we also have to be committed to putting work first, not government first. Making sure that we are giving kids and adult learners the ability to be retrained to get back into the workforce, where we are focused on a program that I'm putting in place, which is Project 50. Right now, our median income is roughly about $34,000 a year. I believe we can get to $50,000 a year. We have the assets, we have the tools, and I want you to know that I'm going to be a great partner for you at the local level, making sure that the state is bringing our resources to bear to ensure that we're doing all that we can every single day to where we have greater economic prosperity and no one is left behind. It is an honor and a joy to be with you today. Thank you for all the support that you have given me over the years, and I look forward to taking some questions and then having a closing comment.
Thank you for those comments. Mr. Bluestein, your first question.
Yeah, Governor Nathan Deal's decision to give state law enforcement officers 20% pay raises has set off some criticism from local police who want similar raises. Should the state chip in for those pay hikes for local officers? And what would you do to bring more parity to police pay?
Well, as you know, first of all, law enforcement is extremely important to all of us. They're the ones that put on the uniform and the badge every day to keep us safe. And as a result of that, there's no real way that you can fully compensate someone who is willing to put their life on the line each and every day. But at the state level, we stepped up and did something very strong. As a result of that, there has been really disparity that has occurred, particularly at the local level with the county, but also with the city. And I put together a task force, a COP task force as we call it, that really is focused on how do we ensure that we are focused at the local level. Cities and counties were represented in that task force. And as a result, what we came up with is we said we need to focus at the local level and looking at what that pay scale needs to look like. But also, we recognize that some communities do not have a tax base that can generate enough in order to pay an adequate wage. And as a result of that, very similar to what we do in education with equalization, I believe the state can and should play a role in that. And so the task force is going to be recommending taking $7 million through a grant process that cities and counties can apply for that will help them ensure that adequate salaries are paid to those individuals that keep each of us safe in our communities.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Your next question?
Yeah, there seems to be a growing sense among Democrats and Republicans in the legislature that it's time to commit more dedicated state funding each year to MARTA and mass transit. As governor, what would you do to fund transit, rail, and the technological investments needed to run a smart transportation grid among cities across the state?
Well, as I think each of us know, that the transit system that we call MARTA is a huge asset to our state. And I would submit to you that we probably would not have won the Olympics had we not had MARTA. And when you look at all of the major economic development announcements that have been, that we have received, all of them have put a prerequisite to be on MARTA because they understand the value. And so, yes, we have to expand. We have to focus our efforts to ensure that we are allowing this great asset to add value to individual lives. And it's not to say that there's not value, but I can tell you, imagine what could happen if we transformed and began to look in a regional context with MARTA. And we said that we're going to have a rebranding, we're going to have a new governance structure, and we're going to bring communities together and look at what those communities and those citizens are looking for. The ability to get on your app, pull up, and know that when the train's going to leave, but also when it's going to arrive, but also being able to reserve your seat, being able to have a Starbucks coffee waiting on you, and a timely manner that's not stopping every 5 seconds. You see, that is a value proposition that individuals will consume. And as government, we need to look, just like my 30-plus years in private sector, we need to look at the value proposition. What are we giving to our citizens? So yes, I'm going to be committed to ensuring that we build a consensus. But the first thing that has to be done is we need to determine, as a region, where the expansion needs to occur, and more importantly, what is the service by which we're going to offer. And I will be a governor that will lead that effort.
Thank you for those comments. You now have 2 minutes to give us your closing statement.
Well, thank you very much. Again, I have enjoyed being with you. I have enjoyed being your lieutenant governor as well. I've had the great privilege of serving with 2 governors, as you know, both Sonny Perdue and Nathan Deal. I know the complexity of navigating through difficult public policy issues, but I also know how to negotiate through the economic development as well. But my close really is a personal close. And that is 25% of our kids today live in poverty. We have 40 counties that have 40+% poverty rates that exist. That is unacceptable in a state our size and a state in which has this much prosperity. And the reason I talk about it and the reason that you see around my initiatives is because I want economic prosperity where no one is left behind. And I believe that we can provide that. And the reason I believe it and the reason that I'm passionate about it is because I understand it. You see, my dad left my mom when I was 3 years old. Those early years were spent in a little single-wide trailer with my mom. I remember vividly walking in and seeing her kneeling by her bed and saying her prayers, asking for God's provision. My mom didn't just teach me the value of faith. She taught me the value of hard work as well, because she worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. She never took a dime of public assistance. You see, what she was determined to do is to ensure that we were never going to stay trapped in the set of circumstances that we were in. Growing up without a safety net makes you get up early and work hard. And I will tell you, this state has given me so much from a personal, family's perspective, but also business and public service. I am humbled by it. I am not running against one individual for governor. I'm not running for a job, and I'm not running for a title. I'm running to make a difference. Thank you all
Thank you
very, very
so
much, and God bless you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Our next candidate is Stacey Abrams. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. So I'm one of the two Stacys you'll hear from today. Thank you. Early morning humor. I'm honored to be here today. I'm honored to stand with GMA for, I think, my 9th year, because I understand the importance of local government. But more importantly, I understand the values that are rooted in the state of Georgia. I've lived here for almost 30 years. I grew up in Mississippi, but I graduated from high school in Decatur. I went to college at Spelman in Atlanta. I started a small business about 5 years ago that's helped move capital to small businesses across the state. And I've spent my time at the capital of Georgia fighting for our communities. But where I grew up in Mississippi, we were what my mother referred to as the genteel poor. We had no money, but we watched PBS and we read books. And my parents struggled. My mom and dad both went to college, they both worked full time, and still they struggled to make ends meet. They had to fight to make sure we were in the right schools. We lived on the poor street on the middle class side of town so we could get zoned into the good school. Back then there wasn't Google Maps, so we had to just do magic cartography. But what my parents understood was that there was promise available, that there were opportunities available. And in 1989, they moved our family from Mississippi to Georgia to pursue that promise. My parents went to Emory University to become United Methodist ministers, and I graduated from high school in DeKalb County. But what I remember about coming to Georgia was that things were still tough. We still struggled, but that struggle was different. Because even though we didn't have a car, we had access to MARTA. And even though we didn't have health insurance, if one of my siblings got sick, we could go to Grady. Georgia has challenges, but Georgia also has opportunity. And that's why when it came time for me to pick my permanent home, I very easily chose Georgia. And I'm standing here today because I know the Georgia we can be is a stronger, brighter, bolder Georgia that serves everyone. When I think about the work that I've done in this state, when I came back to Georgia, I remember thinking about the cities, because my first job in government was at the city of Atlanta. As a college student, I worked for the Office of Youth Services. I'd gotten into a fight with Mayor Maynard Jackson when I was a freshman in college. He won the fight, but he gave me a job. And I got to work on issues of youth violence prevention. I went off to graduate school and law school, and I came back as a private attorney. But my job as a private attorney included learning about public finance. And I began what my mom calls my trajectory of downward economic mobility when I quit that private sector job to go and work for the city of Atlanta as deputy city attorney. And it is in that job and in that role that I learned about the importance of local government. I learned about tax remittances and trying to fight with the state of Georgia to get your money. I learned about the infrastructure funding when you try to figure out if you're on a state road or a county road or if the city's responsible. I learned about the issues facing local governments trying to deal with human services because the money goes to the county, but the poverty seems to be concentrated in our cities. And I learned about the importance of having a good conversation with your counties when you're dealing with the service delivery agreement. And so when I ran for office in 2006, I didn't run for office. I ran for our local governments. I ran for our families because our families are best served by the government that is closest to them, by our municipal governments. And I ran because I knew that there were too many people in office who'd never had to implement a single law that they passed. And so I stand here today as someone who is committed to lifting up our local governments, to lifting up our communities. And I'm someone who comes with a proven track record, because it's not enough to say you stand with someone if you can't prove that you've done it. And that's why I am proud of the work that I've done for our local governments. I'm proud to have won the Champion for Georgia Cities award from the GMA. I'm proud of the fact that I fought to retain access to broadband and telecom by fighting in 2012 to stop the prohibition for municipal broadband in the state of Georgia. I'm proud that I've fought year after year to allow local governments to keep their information on property tax bills so they can collect the monies due to make sure the governments can run. But I'm also proud of the work I've done fighting for health care, fighting for Medicaid expansion so that we can treat our mentally ill and get them out of our jails and into the help they need. And as the next governor of Georgia, I'm going to fight to expand access to Medicaid. I'm going to fight to make certain that transportation and transit is not just a conversation for Atlanta, but a conversation for the state. Because it's just as much about Junction City families being able to get to a grocery store down in Columbus because they need to take transit as it is about getting around on MARTA. From Abbeville to Zebulon, we have to have a governor who believes in our cities, and that's what I will do. I've introduced plans to talk about how I will lead the state. I've talked about advanced energy jobs, which we know are helping transform communities in Camilla and Tybee Island, making certain that we can create 25 to 45,000 new jobs for Georgians. I've pushed for an economic mobility plan to make certain that our families are earning and growing and being protected, because economic mobility is an issue that is trapping so many of our communities. And I've put forward a bold plan for youth and children, because if we don't take care of our kids from the moment they arrive, how can we help them thrive? I'm excited about the opportunity to run for governor because I know what it means to lead. I know what it means to want, but I also know what it means to have success in your forward vision. Georgia is an extraordinary state, a state where prosperity is possible, a state where workers and businesses can work together, not in competition. I'm proud of the fact that I've won both the Georgia Chamber of Commerce A rating and the Friend of Labor Award for the same work in the same year. Somebody was confused, but both of them liked it. And so I stand here as someone who has brought together communities. As minority leader, it was my job to knit together communities across the state, from representation who thought that they were urban or rural, suburban, or didn't really know where they fit, but knew they needed representation. And even though I led as a state legislator from Kirkwood, I understood that I also had to think about communities across the state, from Ludowici all the way to DeSoto. My job is to stand with cities, to stand with community, to stand with our families. And I intend to be the next governor of Georgia because I know that we have a diversity in our state that is our strength, a diversity in our state that is our gold star. And together we can transform the state of Georgia so that no matter where you live, no matter what your zip code, you never have to worry if Georgia is looking out for you because we'll be in this work together. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. Mr. Bluestein, your first question.
Every year, lawmakers propose bills that seem to challenge home rule, whether they be plastic bag bans or new restrictions on certain businesses. How would you vet these types of proposals if they make it to your desk as governor?
I believe the first responsibility is to actually stand up as governor and say that we believe in home rule. As a state legislator, both as leader and before I became leader, I have fought consistently to preserve home rule. I fought against that plastic bag ban and worked together to bring a coalition that could kill that bill. I worked to fight against restrictions on home rule, but also to provide more transparency for local governments. Because home rule is not just about what the state legislature tries to oversee, it's also about what it tries to stop local governments from being able to do. One of the challenges I've seen is in our tax process. Transparency is an issue of home rule. Because how can you make decisions for your community when the state is telling you how much money you can have and how you can collect it and how you can spend it? And so as the governor, I think it's important to set the principles under which we will operate. And for me, that first principle is that the government closest to the people is best. And as governor, I will not only fight for home rule, I will make certain that the bills that make it to my desk respect the principle of home rule.
You've called for significant changes to Stone Mountain, a state-owned memorial. When it comes to Civil War monuments, how do you balance the wishes of local governments with state law that now prevents many from taking action?
Sure. So as I said, I grew up in Mississippi. I grew up in a state that still flies the Confederate flag as its state flag. I grew up in a community where when I was in elementary school, we were compelled to go and visit Beauvoir, the last home of Jefferson Davis. Imagine being a 7 or 8-year-old who has to stand in front of the graves of slaves and be told to celebrate the man who put them there. I hold the conversation of the Confederacy and its veneration to be a very personal one. And in the context of the conversation about Confederate monuments, I bring to it a very specific understanding of what that meant to my family, what it meant to me, to see people tell me I was less than because of the color of my skin. And to know that these communities, not in the wake of the war, but years later, to terrorize communities of color and Jewish communities, started putting up statuary, not in celebration or not in commemoration, but in celebration. And that's deeply problematic to me. If you remember the context of my comments on Stone Mountain, they happened in the wake of the President of the United States saying that there were bad folks on both sides, equivocating about racism, equivocating about domestic terrorism. And when asked the question, do I believe that we should celebrate domestic terrorism in the United States and in the state of Georgia, my answer is an unequivocal no. My leadership at the Capitol demonstrates that I have strong principles about what I believe, but I think that we have to work together to solve those problems. But people need to know where you want to go in order to follow, and that's why I was very unequivocal about the fact that I think we have to address Confederate monuments in the state of Georgia.
Thank you for those comments. We'll wait for the clock to reset, and then you'll have 2 minutes to give us your closing remarks.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to Mr. Bluestein, thank you to GMA, thank you to Larry Hansen, the new executive director. But I also want to take a moment and thank the mayors and the city council members, the city managers, the people who have stood up for our communities across the state in good times and bad. I came into the legislature in 2007 at the tail end of one recession, heading into another one. And I've watched local governments struggle to meet the needs of their communities day in and day out, sometimes with less money, but always with a mission and a heart for good. The state of Georgia faces really important challenges. We have a high poverty rate, we have an unemployment rate that's going down, but folks are not seeing their salaries go up. We have communities, especially rural communities, that are struggling to maintain their hospitals, to provide for their families, and to get out of the debt that has been in place for so long. But I know that working together, the state of Georgia has an extraordinary opportunity. And the reason I'm running for governor this year is because I have the proven experience, the track record, and the vision to make better possible. We have to have a governor who believes in every Georgian, who looks around and doesn't see problems, but sees opportunities for solutions. I've been a tax attorney, a small business owner, an effective civic leader, and I've served in the state legislature for 11 years, 7 of which I served as minority leader. And in my time as minority leader, I was proudest of the moments where I stood together with people from across the aisle and across the state with a single common vision to make Georgia greater. And I look forward to doing that as your next governor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Hunter Hill. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Well, good morning to y'all. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's truly great to be with our, I call it boots on the ground leaders. Y'all are the ones that are closest to our citizens, and you have to deliver results every day. Otherwise, you'll feel the wrath like no other. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for taking care of Georgians. I'm Hunter Hill. I'm a lifelong Georgian. I grew up here my whole life. I got a chance to go to West Point to play football. And after graduating from the United States Military Academy, I chose to be an infantry officer, which brought me down to beautiful Fort Benning, Georgia, where I learned to jump out of airplanes and became an Army Ranger. I then led 5 different teams on 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've been in the real estate development business, and I've got a beautiful wife, Shannon, and we have 2 lovely children, Hunter and Annie. And I've been a state senator for 5 years. And I can tell each and every one of you that there is so much more we can be doing to move the conservative agenda forward, to help Georgia reach its full potential. But it's not going to happen unless we elect a true conservative leader to be our next governor. Because the values that most Georgians believe in, less government, less taxes, more freedom, is not going to happen if we elect a career politician to be our next governor. I want to tell you about my vision, but I also want to tell you where all this started for me. Many of you remember 1996 is when we were having the Olympic Games. For me, on July 1st of 1996, it was my first day at West Point. I remember giving my mom a hug, getting a new haircut, and a new set of uniforms. And by the end of that first day, we were marched out onto the plane, the Washington plane at West Point, and I raised my right hand, and I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to the same. And I can tell you that all 1,000 of us had no idea that only 5 years later, we would be leading America's sons and daughters in the fight against Islamic terrorism in Afghanistan. After that time, I ended up leading 5 different teams on 3 combat tours, and having faced the enemies of our country, I can tell you Islamic terrorism will never bring our country to its knees. We are far too strong for that, and they are far too weak. But what will bring our country to its knees are weak, career politicians who undermine the values and principles that made us the greatest country in the world. And that, to me, is the fight of our time. You know, the oath that I just mentioned to you that I gave as a military officer is very similar to the oath that politicians give. The difference is that the military man is willing to risk their life to uphold their oath, and career politicians are not even willing to risk their own reelection to uphold their oath. So you have a scenario where the military man and woman is willing to stand up to Islamic terrorism, but the career politician is not willing to stand up to the lobbyists and the special interests to uphold their oath. So we have Republicans and Democrats in this room, and we recognize, or at least I recognize, this is not a party problem that we face. This is a career politician problem. So I didn't feel like politics is something that I chose. I feel like it happened to me over the course of my time. Over 8 years of service and 4 years at the military academy, I was just proud to serve and get to lead and candidly to play college football. But over the course of my service, especially in my 3rd tour in Afghanistan, as an implementer of national policy, I found that our leaders, our elected leaders, were letting us down by undermining the principles that made us great in terms of limited government, free enterprise, individual responsibility. And so I decided to get involved, and I found in my tenure of service in the Senate, much of that is still going on, even with Republican leadership. So here is my vision for this state. It's not rocket science. It's to move us to a more limited and focused government that delivers results for taxpayers. I believe the size and scope of government has grown so big in our country that it's usurped the role of the church and the family, which has undermined our communities all over this state. Specifically, I think that we can create an economic boom. We're doing great in Georgia, but we can do better. So my plan for Georgia is really threefold. When businesses and capital and investment are looking to move into this state, they're looking at 3 things, basically. Number 1, what's your tax and regulatory environment like? What's your legal environment like? That's why I want to eliminate the Georgia state income tax. I know our great mayors and city council members on our southern border that are leading, Thomasville, Valdosta, and the other cities across our southern border understand that it's challenging to bring in new business along that southern border when folks can go just across the line and be in a no-income tax state. I've been to Dalton and to many of our cities on the northern border when they're challenged with trying to compete against Tennessee and Chattanooga with no income tax. So I want to work to allow our families to keep more of their hard-earned money and our businesses as well. We need to eliminate the income tax. Number 2, the next thing businesses are looking at is what's your transportation network like? How do you move goods and services to market? That's career politicians have undermined our investment in transportation over the last 40 years in our state. And I think we need to have a leader that's going to stand up and make sure that we have those vital investments without raising taxes. That's why I want to double our investment in transportation in my first term without raising taxes. Thirdly, they're looking at, do you have the workforce that's ready to take on the jobs of the future? To me, this is directly attributable to K-12 education in our technical schools. I think we're doing an outstanding job making that investment in technical college. I want to continue that. But K-12 education, we have let families down with a government-centric approach that's undermining the ingenuity and the excellence of teachers and parents, candidly. I want to empower families with the resources that are theirs anyway, that we're spending on education so that they have more choices and options in education. So that's my plan for Georgia, and you know, at the end of the day, this is about results. Every single one of you in this room has to deliver results. If you don't deliver results, you'll lose your job. If you're a small business owner and you don't deliver results, you'll go out of business. As an Army Ranger and in combat, I was trained to deliver results. And if I didn't, my men's lives would have been at risk. And in terms of my life experience, whether it's in business, in combat, and also as a state senator, I've been prepared to tackle the tough issues and fight for what I believe in, and then ultimately to move people towards a common goal. And that's what I will do as your governor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bluestein, your first question.
Georgia lawmakers are once again debating a plan to require online retailers with a certain amount of sales a year, about $250,000 in one bill, to collect and remit sales taxes. A state fiscal analysis suggests collecting those taxes could mean an extra $200 million a year for local governments. How do you view that plan?
Well, this is completely in line with my plan to eliminate the income tax. Having a broad-based consumption tax is not only going to be good for the state of Georgia, it's going to be good for our cities and counties. We know that 70% of our economy is driven by consumption, yet we only currently tax about 30% of the activities that are consumptive related. Taxing people's incomes is both burdensome, and it only brings in revenue on on Georgians, hardworking and honest Georgians. I mean, think about that. We have tons of wonderful visitors to our state. We have illegal immigrants. We have folks in the underground economy. By having a broad-based consumption tax, we spread out that base of taxation and tax everybody in our state. On the internet sales tax, that's got to be part of the solution. We've got to move our tax code into the 21st century. So when I'm talking about expanding a broad-based sales tax, internet sales tax is absolutely going to be brought onto the table. And so that's part of my plan to eliminate the income tax.
Just about every governor has criticized the state's QBE education funding formula as outdated since it passed in 1985, but none has successfully been able to overhaul it. You've argued, among others, that it needs to be rewritten. How will that improve the state's K-12 education system?
When we think of QBE formula, this is how we fund education. It needs to be student-centered. We need to expand choices and options for families. This is really a free market. It's an economic principle of competition. K-12 education has been government-run and sort of a closed monopoly. Only the top 1% have choice. That's not right. And by the way, of that top 1%, you see some of the most robust, excellent schools in the nation in areas of our state where there is choice and options. Let's drive those choices and options down further, meaning expand them to more people in our state, you know, as we empower families with those resources. Now, the QBE formula, there's three things I want to accomplish in terms of reforming it: making it more student-centered, allowing the money to follow the child, and then also I do like our gold scholarship and tax credits that are available. Again, it's about expanding and expanding opportunities for our families. And then finally, we need equitable funding for charter schools. Having a robust balance of choices and options for our families will elevate K-12 and, I believe, move Georgia from our consistent lagging behind at consistently being rated 48th out of 50 or 47 out of 50. We've got to do something different. We can't. Most of the candidates in the race are going to bring the same old government-centric solutions that have never worked. Let's try something different. Let's empower families. The economic principle of opportunity and choice has worked in almost every other industry. And just since I've got a few more seconds to clarify a point, if you look at all other government-facilitated services, food stamps, we don't have government-run commissaries. Healthcare, we don't make our Medicaid population just go to one hospital. We give them some choices and options. And so that's what I want to do for our people in education.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your comments. You now have 2 minutes to give us your closing statement.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be with y'all. It's great to be with truly the boots-on-the-ground leaders across this state. I truly believe that a more limited and focused government for our people will be delivering results for them. I also believe that it will be better for the leaders of Georgia. you, the mayors and the city council members across our state, to be able to work more closely with our people and to deliver results for them as well. But really, this is about who can you count on to deliver results. And that's what my life has prepared me to do, whether it be in business, in combat, or fighting for our values and principles in the state Senate. I'm prepared to deliver results. I'm also very prepared to listen. That's a huge part for me about leadership, is listening to what's going on in your communities. And I'd be grateful for the opportunity to work with you next year, but I'll be honest with you. We're not going to win without your help. And so I'd be grateful for those of you that appreciate the kind of values and the work ethic that I'm going to bring to the table. And I'd love to work with you and get to meet you and your constituents and serve with you as governor and help us lead our state forward. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments. Our next candidate is Stacey Evans. Good morning and welcome to Mayor's Day.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Above all else, after last night, can we all agree that we are all Eagles fans this morning? Please. My daughter was trying to torture me. She told me last night that she was rooting for the Patriots. And I said, honey, you'll know why that's so bad in a few years. She's only 5, so she's got a lot to learn. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all you do, to the mayors, to the city managers, to the staff at GMA. You are a bedrock for how government works throughout the state and how we get our people what they need. I have been running for governor now for about 8 months, and I've been traveling around this state. Got in from Savannah late last night. It is a big state, y'all. And I've seen what you see. People are hurting. Families are hurting, and they need our help. They don't want our pity. They don't want government to do everything for them, but they want their government to work for them because they see it working for others, and it should work for all of us. We know that there are problems all throughout this state. Our schools are underfunded. Our teachers are overburdened, and their classrooms are too high, their class sizes are too high, and their salaries are too low. We fix our schools by investing in them. Kids need resources, not excuses. Our communities cannot thrive when they are isolated from one another. We need connectivity in high-speed rail as well as high-speed data. We've got to remove the barriers that keep families from getting where they are to where they want to be, whether that's a good job, starting a new business, or giving their kids opportunities that they could never dream about. We need to make sure that when people are sick, they can go and see a doctor because they're covered with insurance. It's way past time for the state to expand Medicaid. We need to start learning earlier, and it never needs to stop. When I'm governor, pre-K is going to be truly universal, and I believe that it should start as early as age 2. And I believe that we need to restore tuition-free technical college in this state. It's the right thing for families, and it's the right thing for our workforce. When the state government focuses on these things, it will be doing its job, which means that you get to do your job. Everybody stays in their lane. Now, none of this is easy. In fact, it's very hard. But none of it is out of our reach if we are deliberate about it. And I know we can do these hard things because I've seen this state do it before. And I've seen what investment in people does, not just for the individuals, but for our state. Because I stand here as a product of one of the greatest programs that this state has ever invested time and money in, and that's the Hope Scholarship Program. I was born in Ringgold, Georgia. That's in the northwest corner of the state, right on the Tennessee line in the mountains. My mom was only 17 years old when she had me. She herself never graduated from high school. We had a rough time growing up, to put it mildly. We moved a lot. I can remember living in at least 16 different homes by the time I was 18 years old. I remember coming home and finding that our power had been turned out again, or seeing my mom cry with frustration at why she was working hard but still could not keep the lights on and keep groceries in the refrigerator. I remember very vividly one time looking out my window and seeing one of my stepfathers dragging my mother through the yard, beating her up. And I called the cops for help that morning. And the cops told me that they knew my stepfather, and they didn't think he'd hurt a fly. So they didn't come to help, and he kept beating her. It was in that moment, I think more than any other, that I realized how much it matters who's in power. and what people can do with it. Now, Ms. Henderson, my government teacher at Ringgold High School, taught me the good that people can do with power. She invited Governor Miller to come to our school and tell us about hope. And he told us that if we kept up a B average, our college could be completely paid for. And regardless of our grades, if we wanted to have access to technical college, it was ours for the taking. So that's what I did. I made a B. I went to the University of Georgia, the first in my family to go to college, and everything that's amazing in my life started the moment I stepped on campus. I graduated. I stayed there for law school and met my husband, Andrew. We now have that beautiful but misguided sports fan, Ashley, who's 5, who will be 6 next month. I have my family because of hope. I've been able to have an amazing career as an attorney because of hope. I was able to serve in the state legislature, the same body that saw fit to invest in me before they ever knew me some 20 years earlier through the Hope Scholarship. Now I'm running for governor to be a champion for every kid in this state growing up like me, where going to college can literally change your life. That's the Georgia that I know. That's the Georgia that I know we can be again, with that strong vision of investing and believing in our people. We've got to make sure that the divisions do not get in the way of that progress. Now, DC's got some issues. It's dysfunctional. It's literally broken at this moment. There's a lot of division up there that tries to trickle down to us, and we can't let that happen. When we focus on Georgians, and we remember that there's so much more that unites us than that divides us, and that we believe in ourselves, we can do anything. I want to be the governor of that state. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Mr. Bluestein, your first question.
About the only form of government which has been growing in recent years is cityhood, and many elected officials from those new cities are here this morning. What is your opinion on the creation of new cities, and how would you vet the approval of those new cities?
Thank you. Cities are an amazing tool of government because they're so close to the people. And I think the increase in the cities that we've seen across the state are not completely unrelated with the frustration that people feel with the government that they feel less connected to. So I think the more that our state government does to work closely with our local governments, being county and cities, the more that we'll be able to streamline government and services. And I want to make sure that there is always a true partnership, and that the city elected officials know that we're not just going to pass what we think is the best at the state level, but we want to include you from the ground up, not bring you in after we've already decided what we're going to do and ask you what you think, but really bring you in as true partners. And y'all have an amazing staff at the Capitol for your eyes and ears. Y'all have chosen wisely. They are good people, but they don't sit where you sit. They don't know everything that you know, and they can't. We all have information that we bring to the table, and I think that as the next governor, I want to use that and have a advisory board of actual locally elected officials in the city. Now, as far as new cities, if after we wave our magic wand and everybody's singing Kumbaya and everyone feels really good about state, local government working together, and we don't feel like we need any more cities, if there still are efforts to create new cities, I think we just need to have dialogue about it, particularly probably more so between the cities and the counties than between the state. But I'm committed to a constant dialogue because just like a marriage, communication is key.
The prescription drug epidemic and opioid abuse are hitting big cities and small towns alike. What would you do to make it harder for doctors to overprescribe the medication and help local governments deal with this crisis?
Thank you. The opiate crisis is real, and I know I don't need to tell y'all that. I can see it in your nodding heads and your eyes. I, like many of you in this room, have a personal experience in my family with the effects of opiate abuse. My brother suffered from addiction of opiates for about 6 or 7 years. I'm very proud to report that he is almost a year and a half clean, and I'm so proud of him. But the effects on our family were devastating to him and his relationship with his little girl. And we've got to stop this epidemic in its tracks. Now, it doesn't always start with a prescription, but oftentimes it does. And last year, my husband had a very simple outpatient gallbladder surgery procedure, and he was prescribed a 30-day supply of oxycodone. Now, we're very sensitive to the abuse in our family, so he took only a few of those pills for a couple of days and then suffered through the pain. But then when he tried to take those pills back, there was no easy way for him to do so. Essentially, he was told he was on his own. We knew we didn't want to flush it. We knew we didn't want to just throw it away. We had to search and search and search to find a way for this to be taken back. So I think the state needs to streamline that process, make sure that there's more information available to both prescribers, to pharmacists, and to patients on how they can safely dispose of leftover opiates. And I was proud to be part of legislation that took steps toward that last year. But I'll tell you this, one big thing that we can do in this state to curb the opiate addiction is to have expanded use of medical cannabis without limitations put on doctors to prescribe by our state government, letting them have the full range of prescription authority. Because in states that have widespread medical cannabis use, the opiate addiction rates have gone down drastically. And it's high time that we recognize that fact here in Georgia.
Thank you. You now have 2 minutes to give us your closing remarks.
Thank you. I would like to note for the record that I was 2 minutes under on my opening, so saving time, I will save you money as your governor as well. It's a trend. I think what Georgia needs, and I think what all of us want, is a governor that works for people and lets everyone thrive and be at their best. Let business thrive, let people live, work, and play, and everyone stay in their lane. To do this, we have got to make sure that we do not get sidetracked in partisan squabbles. We've got to stop focusing on legislation that pleases only a small fragment of one party in this state, as opposed to focusing on the things that help all of us. We are so excited to be on the short list of Amazon. We want those 50,000 jobs. We want to attract the next Delta, the next Coca-Cola. We cannot do that if we get sidetracked in this so-called religious liberty legislation. Now, every Republican you've heard from so far and every Republican you'll hear from after me supports that legislation. It is wrong-headed, and it will kill our business community. It will kill our tourism community, not to mention the fact that it sends the wrong message that this state is open to hate and discrimination. I won't stand for it. I want to focus on building jobs and building communities, not building discriminatory practices. I'll tell you another thing. Atlanta's great. Atlanta's been my home, Metro Atlanta. I've lived in Cobb County for the last 9 years or so, and it's a great place. But I'm originally from Ringgold, as I told you. I know that the world doesn't end at the edge of 285. We need to make sure that communities all across this state have the ability to attract businesses, and that means we invest in them by investing in transportation infrastructure, broadband infrastructure, and schools so that they can attract the next big business. That's how we're going to grow rural communities, not paying people to move to those communities, by incentivizing businesses to start there and investing in the communities. That's how we're going to attract people to live in those communities and truly grow those communities how we want them to be. Thank you for having me this morning, and thanks for all you do.
Thank you so much. Our next candidate is Secretary of State Brian Kemp. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Morning. Good morning. Great to be with you all this morning, seeing so many friends and familiar faces in the crowd, and certainly appreciate your interest in the 2018 governor's race. For those of you that may not know me, I am Brian Kemp. I've been a small business owner for over 30 years. My wife Marty and I have 3 teenage daughters, and since you all are a lot of politicians in the room like myself, yes, I am trying to get the sympathy vote for having 3 teenage daughters in this race. But I've also been living in Athens my whole life, and I'm running for governor because it's time that we put Georgians first ahead of the special interest, the status quo, and the politically correct. I first ran for the legislature in the early 2000s because, like many of you all that have gotten into public service that are serving now, I was a frustrated small business owner, tired of over-government regulations, high taxes, and really just felt like we need a common sense business person's mentality in the Georgia General Assembly. I ran against an incumbent in a district that nobody thought I could win, but I did it because I was passionate and I wanted to make change. And I did that in the state Senate, cutting regulations, cutting taxes, making government more efficient. That's why I've always run, and it's why I ran for Secretary of State. After being home for 3 years, focusing on my family and my business, I was honored to be able to come back and serve as the 27th Secretary of State. But one thing that I learned when I was home, watching from afar, knowing how the process worked, is that I told myself, if I ever run for office again, I will do a very simple thing. I will tell people what I'm going to do, and when I get in office, I will simply do that. I think that is something that frustrates many Georgians, not only with our state government sometimes, but also certainly at the federal level. So when I became Secretary of State, I did exactly what I told you I would do when I was campaigning. I used technology to streamline the office and make it more efficient. At one point, cutting our budget 25% during the recession and losing almost 30% of our people. But like your work at the local level, our workload didn't change. We had to figure out how to do more with less. And we've done that with our new corporate filing system that's now setting records. Our new voter registration system that every county and every city that holds an election uses. We've moved off a old antiquated mainframe system to a web-based system, a statewide IT project that's more efficient, more secure, does more things for the folks working in your local community that are registering people to vote and using that system, and it saved the taxpayers millions of dollars. I also told you that I'd be a fighter for you as Secretary of State, fighting to make sure we had secure, accessible, and fair elections, and we've done that. Implementing things like online voter registration, where you can literally register to vote 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I want to do those same things as your governor, and I've got a common sense, conservative 4-point plan to do just that. Make Georgia #1 for small business, building off the great things that we've already done here in our state, and I applaud the legislators and the governor and everyone else, you all in your local communities that have made Georgia the #1 state in the country for business. But as a small business person, I know the next step is to focus on small business, because in your local community back home, that's who's really hurting still. We do that by taking a chainsaw to government regulations, getting business people, not a bunch of bureaucrats, to streamline processes, to continue to make Georgia the #1 place in the country to own a small business, to start one, or if you simply work in one. #2 is fundamentally reforming state government. That starts with implementing a spending cap. You know, a lot of people are talking about cutting taxes, but I think the way to go is to implement a spending cap, so in good times like we're in now, we budget conservatively, we fund the things that we should be doing in state government, and we fund them well, like public safety, education, transportation, health care, those core things, and then we bank the rest and have real tax reform for the people that live in your community, putting them ahead of the special interest. The third point is moving all of our state forward. As many of you know, I've traveled to all 159 counties and to many, many, many of your cities. I have been there, I have seen it. We've got to do something to move our whole state forward. That's why I was the first candidate in the race to put out a detailed plan to strengthen rural Georgia that includes broadband access to all parts of our state, giving better opportunities in local communities by creating an economic development strike team that will be working with you to identify assets where we can do projects of regional significance in areas where we need it to grow all of our state. The fourth point is simple: putting Georgians first. That's putting you and your people ahead of the special interests, the status quo, and the politically correct. It's time to do that. And as governor, you have my commitment and my word that I will fight every day to put Georgians first, implementing that 4-point plan, working with you. I've been honored to be in attendance at many of your conventions, to visit many of you in your city halls and government complexes around this state. I feel like I know it better than anybody running for governor. And that's not to say anything bad about any of these good folks, but we're fortunate to be able to work with all 159 counties in many, many cities in our daily duties in the Secretary of State's office. And I have a track record of being a listener and being someone that can work with you. And I certainly want to do that as your governor. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you for your consideration. And for those of you that are already supporting me, thank you so much for your support. I'm honored to have it. And I'd love to have your colleagues as well. Thank you, and I look forward to Greg's questions.
Thank you.
Georgia could wind up requiring a special session later this year to offer a range of new incentives to try to lure Amazon a second headquarters to Metro Atlanta. Should lawmakers also consider more aggressive incentives to help far smaller companies expand or relocate in other parts of the state? And how do you balance the need for those types of incentives?
Well, I'm very confident of the plan that's being put forth for, Amazon or anybody else that we're working on. I think our governor, certainly we've got, if not the best, one of the best Department of Economic Developments in the country. I know the city of Atlanta and many other people in the private sector are working on that, so I'm very confident of that. And that is a tight-lipped process, as it should be, because you really just need one chief driving that engine. So I'm very confident in the governor's ability, if he sees the need to have a special session. I'm very confident in the members that are in this room to join with him if they see fit to move that forward and try to land that if we get it. But I'm also in the camp that if we don't get it, it's not the end of the world for our state. Because I know we live in the greatest state in the country. And as somebody that's been in the private sector for 30 years, I know the kind of opportunity that we have. And I want you all to know that I will be a governor that will be just as excited about 50 jobs in Bainbridge as I will a corporate relocation to Buckhead in Atlanta. There may be somebody from Buckhead in another part of the state, but I'm talking about the Buckhead in Atlanta. But, that's what I think our focus needs to be. It's why I've got the plan to strengthen rural Georgia. Nobody will be more supportive of the great things that we have going on in our major cities like Atlanta, Augusta, Savannah, Macon, Bibb, wherever they are. But we've also got to focus on the smaller communities in our state. Our children and our grandchildren should not have to move away for a better opportunity. If they want to, I understand that, but they shouldn't have to. And I will be a governor that will be working with you all to move the needle in other parts of our state as well.
I'm going to ask you a variation of a home rule question I asked to another candidate earlier because I think it's important to this audience. Legislation is introduced every year on subject ranging from that plastic bag ban we talked about earlier to municipal right-of-way. What is your view on preemption legislation that could affect home rule, and how would you vet these types of proposals if they make it to your desk as governor?
Well, I think, I thought about that question. I appreciate you asking me a question that's already been asked before. That's very nice of you. But, I actually thought about that when that question was asked earlier, and I think I would just tell you to look at my record. This race is going to be about, who you think is going to be the best governor as far as who you support. And I'm running on my record. I'm running on it in the private sector. I'm running on it what I've done in the General Assembly. And I'm certainly running on it for what I've done as Secretary of State. And a good example is like when I first got in office, we created an election advisory committee that Mayor Schwabe from Swainsboro served on, along with a bipartisan group of folks, Republicans, Democrats, Libertarian, county and city officials. We've done that a couple of different times in the Secretary of State's office. And I'm the guy that's shown up at your conventions. I've stood there and spoken with you and heard about what your issues are and pledged and have worked with you on, voting issues, licensing issues, the things that we deal with, not only you, but your constituents in the Secretary of State's office. And that's what I plan to do as governor. Probably the best thing that someone would say about me that really knows me, and I've heard this before, is that, he's the same person he is today than before he ran for office. And that's really true. I mean, I'm lucky to have a wife and 3 daughters that keep me humble and remind me often that I'm not near as important as I think I am. And that's the truth. But I'm also that accessible person where if you're up for session, you can walk in my office and I will sit down with you. If I come to your town, I stay with friends like Councilman Randall Walker from Perry when I'm in town. I'm not staying at a hotel. I'll be that same accessible person as governor, and I pledge that I will work with you.
Thank you. You now have 2 minutes to give us your closing remarks.
Well, thank you all again for having me. It's been an honor to be here this morning again, and I appreciate your service so much, and I appreciate your consideration for my candidacy in this race for governor. You know, just to close, I just want to mention to you a couple of things, and the number one is really, who do you trust? Because everybody that's running for governor is going to have good ideas, they're going to have broad proposals, and they're good people. And you know most of them. You've worked with a lot of them before. But the question I would have you ask is, who do you really trust when they tell you about these plans to actually implement them? And I can tell you, you can trust me. Because when I ran for the Senate, I told you what I was going to do, or I told my district. And I've got a record of doing that. And I certainly have that record as Secretary of State of telling you what I was going to do and doing it. And when you look at our 4-point plan to move our whole state forward, it is a plan that you can look at and say, you know, this is reasonable, this can be implemented, this will move the needle. And it includes all of Georgia. You know, that is my goal as governor, is to do exactly what I have told you this morning. Fundamentally reforming state government, making Georgia #1 for small business, building off the great things that we're doing, strengthening our whole state where we're all thriving, and also putting Georgians first. That is my pledge to you, that I will put you and your people that you represent first. I'd be honored to have your support. You can check out more of our detailed plans at kentforgovernor.com, or ask some of the colleagues that are here that are already on board with our campaign. We'd be glad to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our final candidate is Senator Michael Williams. Good morning, and thank you for being here.
Good morning. First of all, I just want to thank my great ancestors for giving me the last name Williams. I think an hour and a half you guys have been up here or been down there listening to speakers, so I am so excited to wrap this up for y'all. I'm a relative newcomer to politics, and I doubt many of you have even heard my name before I announced to run for governor. So what I thought I would do for the 8 minutes I have is, first of all, just kind of tell you a little bit about myself and answer two of the questions that I get asked the most as I travel the state of Georgia. The first one is, Michael, how are you going to beat a guy that's been in office for almost a quarter of a century, since he was 28 years old? How are you going to beat the establishment? The other question is, Michael, you've got a lot of really good ideas, a lot of great conservative ideas, but we see the challenges that President Trump is having. He's fighting members of the media, he's fighting members of the left, members of his own party. How are you going to implement some of these ideas? I want to share a story with you. Back when I was 7 years old, in fact, I just turned 7, it was a few days before Christmas. Wake up one Saturday morning, and my mom brings me and my 3 other siblings, and she sits us down on the couch. Her mom was there, but my dad was noticeably absent. My mom proceeded to try to explain to her 4 children that their dad was sick. Not a physical sick, he didn't have cancer or anything like that, a mental sick. He had served in Vietnam, he came back, and he was diagnosed with bipolar manic depression, and I believe he also suffered from PTSD. That night, he tried to kill all of us, including himself. I didn't learn that night, it was later on in my life, but that night forever changed my life. I'd come home from school some days, and my dad, he had this little bell that he would ring, and he'd sing "Life's a Joke," running around in his underwear out in the street. Other days, I'd come home from school, he'd be in the fetal position in his closet, terrified because somebody or something was out to get him. My mom was there most of the time to protect us and protect him, but when I was 14 years old, one summer I wanted to go to a church camp. And my mom took me and several of us with us to this camp. It was several hundred miles away. My mom and my younger sister and brother, they got home late that night. They ran inside, and they found my dad laying on the ground at the bottom of the stairs with a picture of his family in one hand and a suicide note laying on the table. I went through many struggles and trials as a 14-year-old who lost his father to suicide. Blamed myself, had feelings of self-doubt. But I remember I was a senior in high school. I went to a very, very small school. And I'm a big guy, a larger guy, and I was forced almost to play most of the sports, whether I was good or not. I rode the bench pretty much in baseball, but I was out there nonetheless. My senior year, we got a track coach, a brand new track coach, and he saw me, he saw my height, and he saw my legs, and he said, "Michael, I want you to run the 300-meter hurdles." I don't know if any of you guys are track stars out there, but that's one of the toughest races to run. You've got to sprint 300 meters and jump over these hurdles. Well, again, I went to a small school, very limited resources. I didn't have a track. What I had was a cow pasture. I ran around in circles trying to get endurance. And we didn't even have enough hurdles to make an entire track. So I would run over 3 hurdles. So my practice was run around a cow pasture and then run around these 3 hurdles over and over and over again. When I finally got to my first track meet, I saw something I had never seen before in my life. A track full of hurdles. Y'all are getting ahead of me a little bit here. The gun goes off, and I shoot out, convinced I have a chance to win this thing. Those first 3 hurdles were neck and neck. The 4th hurdle, my leg caught the top of it, and I fell flat on my face. The 5th hurdle, the 6th hurdle, the same thing. By now, everybody else is done. They finished the race, and I'm alone on this track, 17-year-old senior in high school, embarrassed and ready to just give up and quit. But before that thought could even leave my mind, those hurdles, they transformed. No longer were they hurdles of metal and of plastic and of wood, but the hurdles that I had had to overcome my entire life. And I got up and I finished that race. But I still knocked over every single remaining hurdle. I crossed over the finish line, and it's not like in the movies when you got this guy struggling out there on a sports field and he finishes and the whole crowd stands up and applauds. There was none of that. There's nobody patting me on the back when I had finished. I sat down alone in isolation up at the top of the bleachers, just contemplating what happened. And the poem by the English poet William Ernest Henley came to mind. It's a poem in Vidkus, where he talks about, "I am the captain of my fate, the master of my soul." That's the kind of person I've been as a state senator. That's the kind of person I'm going to be as your next governor. We have challenges facing us. And let me tell you who does not have the answers: lobbyists, special interests, and big corporations. They have their own interest in mind. We, the people of Georgia, the citizens of Georgia, need to be represented by somebody who is not beholden to those same groups. I am the only candidate up here that is putting my own money, a significant amount of money, into this race to finance this race, so I won't be bought and paid for when I become your governor. And I'll make a promise to you right now that I will represent you, the people of Georgia, better than any other person that stood up here before. And with that, I guess I'll take some questions.
GMA recently completed.
Thank you.
GMA recently completed a capital needs survey of its membership. Projections indicate that Georgia cities will need about $11.2 billion for capital project over the next 5 years. The greatest category of need for most cities, water and sewer, followed by transportation, public safety, and government buildings. As governor, what would you do to help cities in meeting those funding needs?
The first thing that I would do is work to get state government out of the way. I'm going to ask a question that I probably should not answer or ask because I don't know the answer, and I've been told don't ask a question you don't know the answer to. But I'm willing to bet while the state of Georgia's budget has gone from $15 billion to $26 billion in the past, 8 years, a 71% increase, there's not a city or county in the state that has had that type of increase. Where's that money coming from? I bet there's many of you in here that can come up to me afterwards and tell me where the state has changed a policy or a plan where it took money out of your guys' bank account to put it into their own. I will not do that as the governor of Georgia. I know that the best form of government is the government closest to the people, and the government closest to the people is all of you. We need to make you guys stronger and more relevant, and the state government less relevant.
You've made giving raises for local police officers to match the state raises we talked about earlier a centerpiece of your campaign. How do you pay for those raises without raising taxes?
I want to echo that last part, without raising taxes. There is another candidate in the race that has offered to give law enforcement pay raises on the back of a tax increase based upon car insurance. We already have some of the highest car insurance rates in the country, but yet he wants to tax our car insurance even more to give law enforcement pay raises. For those who don't know, we have over 3,200 law enforcement officers currently on food stamps. We're talking about giving billions of dollars to Amazon to come to our state when we can't even pay those that protect us. Again, I've already mentioned how our state budget has gone up 71% in the past 8 years. I believe that we have plenty of money in the state budget to pay for these law enforcement raises without having to raise taxes. And also, kind of piggyback on, I guess, a question you asked about home rule, if you don't mind. The very first bill that I proposed was, in fact, an unfunded mandate. I got a lot of pushback, which rightfully so. And as an example of how I will govern as your next governor, I listened. I heard that pushback, and I went back to the drawing board, and I created 2 new bills that made it so that the state would pay for those pay raises instead of the local counties and cities.
Thank you. You now have 2 minutes to give us your closing remarks.
All right. There's been talk about Amazon and how so many people want Amazon to come to Georgia. Let me tell you, I love Amazon. My wife even loves Amazon more. I can't tell you how many thousands of dollars we spent on Amazon the past probably 6 weeks, Christmas time. I want Amazon to come because they want to be a part of Georgia and the culture that we have here in Georgia. Not because of the billions of dollars that they're going to receive to come to Georgia. New Jersey has already offered $7 billion. I've read reports where they're expecting anywhere from $9 to $11 billion to come to our state. That's $200,000 a job. Who do you think is going to get those jobs? You think there are people that live in Georgia right now who are going to get those jobs, those 50,000 jobs? I venture to say no. Most of those jobs are going to be brought in from their satellite campuses over in the West Coast already. So we're not going to really be benefiting people that live here in Georgia. But who's going to have to pay for it? Who's going to pay for the schools that these kids, the children, these employees go to school? The roads, who's going to pay for those roads? We are. If I told you that we could get Amazon, if your property taxes were going to go up by 75% in the next 5 years, would you still want them to come? Again, I am going to represent all of you, the people of Georgia, not big corporations, not special interests, and not the political and wealthy elite. And I ask for your support and vote, and you can visit williamsgeorgia.com to learn more about me and to join our movement. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That concludes our forum. Please welcome back GMA President, Mayor Dorothy Hubbard.
Thank you, and thanks to all of our gubernatorial candidates for being with us this morning. We are delighted to hear what you all had to say. Before we leave, I want to again say thanks to our sponsors for this year's conference. I want to also thank all of the guests who joined us this morning, as well as city officials who have participated in this year's conference. We appreciate all of you city officials who have given up your weekend to become better informed about municipal issues throughout the state. And I strongly encourage you to stay informed and engaged as the session this year moves forward. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Have safe travels, and this session is adjourned.